This video is sponsored by Premium Sound, one of the UK's premier dealers located in Kensington, London, with an online store carrying a comprehensive inventory to cater for a variety of needs. For more details, click the link in the description. Apologies if you're picking up on some background noise. It's very stormy outside and I don't think I can avoid that today. Anyway, I want to talk about when I was in my teens. Musical Fidelity was one of the brands that really had an impact on me. I couldn't afford a lot of their products at the time, but dreaming has always been for free. I used to occasionally travel up to Tottenham Court Road, where a dealer had a 50 watt per channel pure Class A Musical Fidelity A1000 amplifier with its off-board power supply hooked up permanently to big KEF reference series floor standing speakers. If no one is in that dem room, he used to kindly let me come in and have a listen. That was the good old days when hi-fi shops were pretty much everywhere and friendly dealers didn't mind kids drifting in, having a browse or quick demo, as long as they weren't being a nuisance and getting in the way of business. In the early to mid-90s, I was at university in Cardiff. One of my friends had bought a used Musical Fidelity A1, naturally with a little encouragement from myself. He was a little braver than me. Running a Class A amplifier in a little dorm room is no joke in summer months. Can I make a quick personal appeal? Dimitris Kalpaxis from Athens, if you happen to be watching this or somebody who knows him, tell him to get in touch in the comments section below. It's a real shame that we lost touch some years after university. Anyway, back to the business at hand. Boy was I excited to get my hands on this one. It brought back some great memories, but the story of this amplifier doesn't end there. The 2023 version of the Musical Fidelity A1 retails for £1,499. It's swelled to a full rack width unit from the original 1985 Tim de Paravicini design. However, the design language of what is perhaps Musical Fidelity's most iconic amplifier is thankfully almost identical. Including the heatsink that forms the top plate of the amplifier, the surface area has purposefully increased to allow for better heat dissipation than the original. At the end of the day, Class A amplifiers do run hot. On the press of the power button, subtle blue illuminations indicate that the A1 has come to life. The volume control has a reassuring inertia upon rotation and is sensibly adjusted from below to keep your hands away from the hot plate on top. The direct button is not to defeat tone controls, as there aren't any. It reduces the gain of the amplifier by 10 decibels to make the volume dial less sensitive, handy if you're using high sensitivity speakers. The input selector affords direct access to 6 inputs, one of which can be used with turntables, with moving magnet and moving coil cartridges. The supplied remote control is a lovely compact metal utensil with refreshingly large buttons for volume adjustment and muting. However, the input selection is conspicuous by omission. At the business end, you'll find a button to engage the moving coil or moving magnet phono stage. There are 4 further standard RCA line level inputs, a tape loop to connect recording devices, and a set of pre-outs to facilitate external power amps or powered subwoofers. Finally, 1 set of standard quality speaker binding posts. Tour of the internals. And here in the corner next to the AC inlet filter, we have a toroidal transformer of decent size. I say decent because it's not massive, but this is only a 25 watt per channel amplifier into 8 ohms. It needs to be a bit bigger than it would be on a Class AB amplifier, which I'm glad to say it is. It also has dual windings on the secondary, so wires running off the back to the back of these power supply filter caps. And that's so they can maintain totally independent power supplies for left and right channels to lower noise and improve channel separation all the way back to the transformer. It's not something you often see on amplifiers at this price, but it's a nice touch. Just one step away from being dual mono in effect. And the power supply filter caps, there's 8 of them, each rated at 10,000 microfarads, so that's 80,000 microfarads in total. Now if this was a Class AB amplifier, that would be overkill for 25 watts per channel. But because it's Class A, it needs that extra current reserve, so this is nice to see. And that's because the transistors are on all the time, drawing current. Most of the time they're just converting that into heat, which is wasteful. but it's still the gold standard as far as sound quality is concerned. They're from Jamicon, the capacitors, which is a mid-tier manufacturer. So the DIYers will be itching to upgrade those to top-tier caps from the likes of Nishikon, Mundorf, Elna, etc. But I'm not going to complain. The amount of capacitance they've gone for here, and given the price of this amplifier, it's totally understandable that they had to go for a mid-tier manufacturer. That's the input stage, and what I think here in the corner is the phono stage, which is moving coil and moving magnet. Not often do you find moving coil on amplifiers in this price either. And it makes sense because it's right there next to the phono input. The track then runs along here, all the way along here to what I would imagine is the preamplifier section. And that is identical to the original 1985 Tim Di Paravicini design. I mean, the amplifier is pretty much identical apart from an upgraded power supply and modern components to lower noise and distortion. And the original did have some problems with failure due to components not handling heat, and these modern components handle heat much better, so reliability should be much better. That's the power amplifier section, and the eagle-eyed of you will spot that there's identical channels for the left and right, separated there in the middle, and it's all through-hole discrete components, which is what you want to see on the power amplifier section. They just handle heat better, so none of those tiny surface mount devices. And the preamplifier section, as well as the input section here, are all discrete as well. Now you could argue you can get away with surface mount there, but I prefer to see through-hole components on analog electronics at least. Digital is a different story. And that's the input selector, which is actually back here. There's a rod connecting it to the front. And here we have the Alps volume control. And that's an RK series Alps volume control, good quality part. And the transistors, if I can get the angle right, hopefully you can see them mounted to that aluminium plate. There's 4 of them. They're from ST Microelectronics, and they're bipolar junction transistors. And that's effectively the sub chassis, always struggle to say that, of the heatsink, and the rest of the heatsink's mounted on top of that. Yeah, lots of nice components, good design, and obviously very heavily based on the original. I always base this section of my review on comparisons, but comparisons on this occasion were very interesting. A couple of weeks ago I reviewed another Class A amplifier. Well, actually it was an amplifier with a heavy Class A bias, but close enough. There were certain similarities. The Vincent SV-237 Mk2 runs the first 10 watts in Class A. It'll switch to 150 watts of Class AB when relied upon. The darn thing is built like a tank, includes a decent DAC, based around a Burr Brown PCM 5102 chip, a triode tube preamplifier stage, and all for $2,500. The Vincent has a liquid smooth mid-range with real substance. It's a signature trait of good Class A amplifiers, a trait that the A1 shares, but where the Vincent lacks a little bit of detail in the mid-range, and especially on top, the Musical Fidelity has none of these drawbacks. The A1 won't drive as hard as the SV-237 Mk2, and tricky speakers will present it with more of a challenge to keep the woofers under control. But in terms of pure fidelity, there's a clear winner here, and it's the Musical Fidelity A1. I also compared the A1 to my 2 favourite amplifiers below £2,000, the Exposure 2510 and the Willsenton R8 with PS Vane upgraded tubes. There are pluses and minuses to this approach. On the downside, I do talk about these 2 amplifiers a lot on this channel, but I've reviewed quite a few amplifiers in this category over the years, and these 2 have stood out. And they also provide a common point of reference, so you can look at one of my reviews from 2 years ago and deduce how that amplifier might compare to the one that I'm reviewing today. Making a direct comparison with the Exposure 2510 demonstrated how good the A1 actually is. However, the 2510 is a wonderfully detailed, natural sounding amplifier with a leaning to the warm side. If the exposure is leaning towards warmth, then the A1 is taking its seat by the fire. It's a whisker less detailed than the 2510, some softening in the leading edges of notes, a shade more smoothing over of timbral nuance, and a little less airy on top. I was only able to tell the differences in resolution because I was A-Bing these two amplifiers together. I could easily make a case for preferring the sound of the A1. It has that liquid smooth mid-range that I spoke about earlier, and if you want this level of harmonic richness plus detail and refinement, I haven't heard this from an amplifier at this price before. The Willsenton R8 with PS Vane tubes shares that fuller mid-range and bass with the Musical Fidelity. Both trade a little bass definition to the exposure, but the R8 sounds a touch grainier in the mid-range compared to the A1, even though it is the tube amplifier that delivers a greater sense of scale. To tell you the truth, I went back and forth between these three amplifiers, and I can't tell you which one I actually prefer. The music and the accompanying speakers dictated my preference. I think all three perform at a very similar level, but with some key differences. In summary, the Musical Fidelity A1 doesn't have quite the resolution of the Exposure 2510, but it has similar dynamic abilities and adds harmonic richness. It doesn't have quite the dynamic abilities of the Willsenton R8, but it has similar harmonic richness and adds refinement. Choosing between these three is going to be a matter of personal taste. The A1 is a plug-and-play device, but there are two things that need consideration. The first is that it's a Class A amplifier and it runs hot. But how hot? Well, it gets pretty uncomfortable if you place your hand on top for more than a couple of seconds, but you're not going to leave a layer of skin on the heatsink. Keep the A1 in a well-ventilated room. I wouldn't be sticking it in a cupboard. I think people in small rooms and in warmer climates may struggle, but beyond that, I wouldn't give it any particular consideration. The second thing is that 25 watts into 8 ohms isn't going to drive insensitive speakers in large rooms to high levels, no matter how good the power supply. However, in my room I rarely listen above 85 decibels, and the Musical Fidelity A1 had no problem with the speakers I tried it with. First up was the Newcastle Windsor Earls that I just finished reviewing. The £3,850 large stand mounts have that traditional British monitor mid-range with authoritative bass and articulate treble performance. Combining warm speakers with a warm amplifier gave a surprisingly neutral sound. Nah, I'm just kidding. Just want to make sure you were paying attention. It was cozy, get your pipe and slippers out. But I'm not making any value judgment. For those people sensitive to brightness and glare, looking for a warm, rich sound, they might be well served with this combination. Then it was time for my standard torture test for amplifiers at this price. My Proact Response 1 SEs tend to expose any shortcomings in the power supply. Yeah, I could tell that the bass control and soundstage were diminished, but I also got to hear the glorious mid-range that the A1 has to offer, and this amplifier could make a good starting point for my Proacts. My £1,300 Amphion Argon 1s were the best match for this 25 watt per channel amplifier. Despite them only having an 86 dB sensitivity, they present a pretty benign load. I've never heard the Argon 1 sound better with any comparably priced amplifier, including the Exposure 2510 and the Willsenton R8. The harmonic abundance of the A1 balanced the slight dryness of the Amphions perfectly. There was energy, drive, plenty of clarity and control. Yup, those puppies were singing. Finally, I wanted to see how horn speakers paired with this modestly powered Class A amplifier, a combination that audiophiles have favoured since the dawn of hi-fi, so the £2,000 JBL 4309s were called upon. They didn't disappoint. Despite the 4309s only being a 4 ohm load, the A1 drove them really well. The JBLs have that presence in the upper mid-range. It combined with the Musical Fidelity's fullness in the vocal, lower mid-range and bass regions to give a thoroughly engaging presentation. Reviving an iconic amplifier such as the A1 was always a risk for Musical Fidelity. If it didn't perform exceptionally well, it was not only likely to tarnish the legacy of the model, but possibly the entire brand. That's because Musical Fidelity has changed hands and we now live in the post-Anthony Michelson era. Thankfully, they've not only revived the classic but improved it. It brings the A1 right up to date whilst maintaining the design philosophy of the original inside and out. Sonically, it delivers everything you could expect from a modestly sized Class A amplifier. Detailed, liquid smooth, harmonically saturated mid-range, good bass, top end that's extended and refined. Sure, there's people at this price who'll look for a powerhouse and something that will run physically as well as tonally cooler, and they should seek alternatives. But if you like what I've described here, I'll challenge you to do better for the price. The Musical Fidelity A1 gets an outstanding from this channel. Over the years, I've admired components that my friends and families have had in their systems, including the original Musical Fidelity A1. And my question for the day is, what are the components that aren't in your system that you have regular maybe access to in friends or family systems that you like or don't like, and the reasons why? Please let me know about that in the comment section. All that remains for me to say is, if you like this video, you like what I'm doing with this channel, you want to see it grow, and you haven't done so already, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. You may want to check me out on Patreon. There's a couple of consultancy services you can access there if you think I can help you on your audiophile journey, as well as checking out the ABA Club on Patreon, which has some fun ways to interact with me and other patrons. But for today, for now, the British Audiophile, signing off.